AI was wrong last time. So, I gave it one more chance on the Iran war. Welcome to the next episode of The Intelligent Observer. Please subscribe for more exciting debates and analysis. Now, if you've watched my previous episode, you'll know something interesting happened. I decided to test artificial intelligence on a geopolitical prediction. A very simple question. Would the United States strike Iran? The AI confidently said no. It explained its logic, historical patterns, strategic restraint, diplomatic pathways, escalation control. But then reality unfolded differently. The strike happened, and suddenly the question became bigger than just whether AI can analyze information. The real question became this: can artificial intelligence truly understand how history unfolds? Or are humans still better at sensing where events are headed? So today, we're going to run another experiment. I decided to give AI a second chance. But this time, the question is much bigger. Not just whether strikes happen, but where this entire conflict could ultimately lead. Could it escalate into something far larger? Could the United States and its allies achieve their objectives? Or are we watching the early stages of something that could reshape the Middle East entirely? So, let's start from the beginning. What are the actual objectives in this conflict? When we strip away speculation and propaganda, the strategic goals usually discussed are fairly clear. First, neutralizing Iran's nuclear capability. Second, destroying or degrading Iran's missile and ballistic strike capabilities. Third, breaking Iran's regional proxy networks. Fourth, guaranteeing long-term security for Israel and other regional allies. And finally, depending on how one interprets the strategy, transforming or replacing the Iranian regime itself. Now here's where the debate begins, because achieving some of these goals through airstrikes is possible, but achieving all of them, that's a completely different challenge. Which brings us to the big question. If air power and limited strikes fail to produce decisive results, what happens next? This is where something fascinating comes into play. Game theory. There is a school of geopolitical thinking, popularized by commentators like Professor Zhang and others, that argues wars often follow predictable escalation patterns. Not because leaders plan them that way, but because once certain commitments are made, leaders become trapped by their own promises. Think about it like a strategic game. If a leader publicly declares that a threat must be eliminated at all costs, and the war begins, and the threat still remains, backing down suddenly becomes politically impossible. So the only remaining move on the chessboard is escalation. From that perspective, the logic becomes simple. Airstrikes lead to retaliation. Retaliation leads to expanded operations. Expanded operations eventually lead to one final question. If the objectives cannot be achieved from the air, does the war eventually move to the ground? Now, before we jump ahead, let's acknowledge something important. There are also people who interpret this conflict through a completely different lens. Not just geopolitics, but religion and prophecy. In some circles, particularly among certain evangelical communities, Middle East conflicts are sometimes interpreted through biblical prophecy narratives. These interpretations suggest that turmoil surrounding Israel could play a role in larger prophetic events described in ancient texts. Some commentators therefore see geopolitical tensions as part of a much longer historical trajectory. Others view the entire situation purely through the lens of power politics and security. Regardless of which interpretation someone subscribes to, the key point is that belief systems influence how people interpret global events. Now let's return to our experiment with artificial intelligence. I asked the AI a series of very simple questions. the same questions many people are asking today. First, will the United States commit to a full ground invasion of Iran? The AI's answer. It explained that modern US strategy tends to avoid massive occupation wars, especially after the experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. Large-scale invasions carry enormous political, military, and economic risks. So the AI predicts that the conflict will most likely continue through a combination of air power, naval pressure, sanctions, diplomacy, and covert actions. Then I asked the next question. If there is no invasion, will the objectives actually be achieved? And the AI's answer was interesting. It said the likely outcome would be partial success. Iran's capabilities could be weakened, programs could be delayed, regional deterrence could be strengthened, but some objectives might remain only partially fulfilled. In other words, a strategic stalemate. But then I asked a different question. What if the conflict escalates? What if the United States and its allies eventually decide that only decisive victory will do? What if they commit overwhelming air power, naval dominance, political pressure, and a full ground invasion, and the AI finally admitted something? Under those conditions, most of the objectives could likely be achieved. Nuclear infrastructure dismantled, missile networks destroyed, proxy coordination disrupted, and potentially even the collapse of the current regime. In other words, a military victory would become highly probable. But the AI still inserted one final caveat. Winning the war does not always mean winning the peace. History is full of examples where battlefield victory was achieved quickly, yet the long-term political outcome remained uncertain. Which brings us back to the larger question. Who is actually better at predicting the future? Human intuition or artificial intelligence? Because AI looks at historical patterns. Humans, on the other hand, often look at psychology, ideology, belief systems, and political momentum. Sometimes wars escalate because leaders make rational decisions. Other times, wars escalate because leaders feel they have no other choice. And that difference can change everything. So here we are. Two perspectives. The AI's answer says the most likely outcome is limited war and partial objectives achieved. But the escalation logic suggests something else. If maximal objectives remain unchanged and partial outcomes are unacceptable, then the path of escalation may still lie ahead. Which brings us to the final question. Where does this conflict ultimately lead? Will it stabilize through diplomacy? Will it remain a prolonged strategic standoff? Or will the escalation ladder continue climbing, one step at a time? Only time will reveal the answer. And when that moment comes, we'll see whether AI finally got it right, or whether human intuition once again sensed the direction of history before the algorithms did. Until then, this has been The Intelligent Observer. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next episode.